Hey, Metal Dave here, along with my co-host Jason McMaster, and welcome to another episode of the Talk Louder podcast. Today, we are going to geek out on the subject of hair metal, or at least I'm going to geek out on the topic of hair metal because it comes as no surprise to anyone who knows me. I love the genre. It often gets dismissed for allegedly uh, having more style over substance in some cases. But regardless, the genre gave us some great singers, some great lead guitar players, some great music, some great bands. We're going to get into all that in just a bit. But first, let me bring in Jason. What's going on with you, man?
I'm good. How are you doing? Good?
Doing great.
Awesome.
Fully recovered after the ice storm and back to normal. Temperatures are back to being pleasant, and the house survived, so no complaints on my end.
Yeah, same thing is happening over here. I have been enjoying my recent score of what I call a royal flush by way of Merciful Fate and King Diamond, which I know I shared on a previous episode, but we tape our these we tape these episodes with literally no moss gathering, so I haven't been able to get through, that the needle on my stylus is busy, right? I'm
Yeah,
flipping records, I'm playing King Diamond DJ over here, and, it's been a lot of fun revisiting that stuff. As you know, some of that stuff I already had in my collection, but
right.
there were a lot of missing elements, so happily, I'm happy with my new acquisition.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
and, just been digging that, and, I wanted to mention that, not to plug it one more time, but one last time, but that show where I did, those songs with Deadbird out of Arkansas, that aired last night. And I forgot to mention that there were about 4, including myself, there were about 4 different artists from Austin in that show, which aired on the Arkansas Times, YouTube page.
Oh,
And
wow.
and I gotta
Nice.
say, it was really well done. So hats off to, that group of, mainly Little Rock musicians and bands, singers and songwriters. A lot of it was over the top metal stuff, but there were a couple of sort of singer-songwriter guys, and,
Yeah.
it was very interesting. I was tapping into it, off and on, and it was great. The Austin artists that were on there were Ungrieved, Black Ops, um oh, man, it's escaping me right now. There were, like, 2 more,
Yeah.
and I was pleasantly surprised, to come late to realize that, shit, half this show is half of Austin. So, that made me happy that
Yeah. So is it captured somewhere that listeners can
it
find it on the
it's
internet and watch it
it
back?
it's streaming. It's just the Arkansas Times, which is I'm guessing is a Little Rock newspaper, YouTube page. If you just go to YouTube and search Arkansas Times, it comes right up. And let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Yeah, it's called Mutants 3: Revenge of the Mutants is the name of the stream.
Nice.
Mutants, Mutants, and Roman numeral 3, Revenge of the Mutants. And man, it came out really good. Like I said, it's a production. It was all pre-recorded. 90% of the performances were actually live, and recorded by, the bands themselves with some
Cool.
production, with some production value added in later in post-production by the Deadbird people. So,
Cool.
anyway, that was really cool, and like I said previous, I did a Deadbird song, and they covered a Dangerous Toys song, "Feels Like a Hammer," which doesn't even get played live anymore, so it's kind of a treat,
Oh, cool, cool.
for Toys fans and for, the class of '89, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Well, cool. Listeners will have to go check that out. I'll need to check that out myself because I missed it when it went live, but I'll watch a playback version of it
It
here at
it
some point.
it's not for the faint at heart because, like I said, a lot of it is like this crushing doom, sludgy kind of metal,
Yeah,
everything tuned to C,
yeah, yeah.
C or lower kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been listening to a new song came out earlier this week by a band called Sunbomb, and for those who aren't aware, it's a new project that features Tracy Guns on guitar and Michael Sweet, the vocalist from Striper, and they leaked out the single. The album I don't think is due until May, but there's one song available. It's called "No Tomorrows," and it's pretty interesting. Uh, they admit in the press release in the promo materials that it's a little more metal. It's got some influences of Judas Priest and Black Sabbath and Ronnie James Dio, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So a little more metal than you're expecting from those two guys. Um, the one track, No Tomorrows, is it almost has a little bit of a power metal kind of vibe to it, but not over the top. And it's pretty interesting. The drummer on the new album is Adam Hamilton, who he was actually the bass player in LA Guns from about 2000 to 2007 or something like that. He played on the Waking the Dead and Tales from the Strip albums. And anyway, Adam's an interesting guy. He isn't so much a performer these days as much as he is a producer. So he's got a studio at his house or nearby. I want to say he's out in LA. He's somewhere in California. But he's worked with some pretty impressive names. Not the least of which is he recorded and produced the some albums by William Shatner, who's Captain Kirk from Star Trek. And he also did an album with David Hasselhoff. He's worked with Billy Gibbons. He's worked with LA Guns. So he's kind of really made a name for himself in recent years as a producer. But he's also a talented musician. He plays drums on this Sunbomb album. And back in the day, he played drums for CC DeVille back when he had that band Samantha Seven, I believe it was called. Um,
And just to be clear, in LA Guns, he didn't play drums, did he?
no, he played bass.
That's what I thought because
Yeah,
I think Broken Teeth, we did some gigs with LA Guns during his era,
yeah,
and that's when I sort of got to have a nice chat with him. That was the only time I've really gotten to chat with him, and I just wanna throw this out there. He was the nicest guy in the room.
totally, man, for
Sweet.
sure. I met him in San Antonio,
Yeah.
and he was so welcoming and so nice, and he asked for my email address, and he stayed in touch ever since, which is pretty incredible. And he's just a real sweetheart of a guy. You're absolutely right. Totally sweetheart of a guy.
He took my creds and he mailed me a care package, and I'll never forget that because he was just shirt off his back. It just
Yeah,
happened to be an LA Guns shirt that he sent me.
yeah, yeah, great guy. So he plays drums on this. There's a guy named Mitch Davis that's the bass player, and Johnny Martin, who is the current bass player in LA Guns, plays on one track. So anyway, the project's called Sunbomb. It's Tracy Guns and Michael Sweet, and it's kind of like I said, got a little bit of a Judas Priest, Ronnie James Dio type of vibe. So if
Well,
that
I
sounds,
wanna hear it now 'cause, you're saying all the magic words.
yeah,
Michael
yeah,
Sweet is one of the most talented people in the rock genre, and he sings and plays his ass off. He is so talented, and it just
yeah.
is stylistic. I love the name Sunbomb, that's great.
Yeah, I have to confess, I feel bad that I was never much of a Striper fan, and it's surely because I just never gave him a chance. I couldn't quite get past all the squeaky clean image and the positive message and the religious overtones, and that's on me. I mean, that's not fair. But my point is, I'm not real familiar with their catalog. I'm familiar with their history and who they are, of course, but was never really a fan of the music. But in this project, he really does. He's got some pipes, and he sounds great on the one song I've heard. So I'm looking forward to hearing more because I'm a huge Tracy Guns fan. So we'll see what the rest of the album sounds like as the songs start to trickle out. But there you go, folks. Check it out, Sun Bomb, featuring Tracy Guns and Michael Sweet. Today, we are talking about hair metal, the often maligned genre of music that came out in the 80s. People associate it with the Hollywood Sunset Strip. They associate it with big hair. They associate it with spandex and, a lot of flash. And because of all those things, it often kind of gets dismissed or belittled or made fun of to a degree. But I'm a huge fan of the genre. A lot of my favorite music came from that time period and from that scene. So I'm all about the early Motley Crue, the Rats, the Poisons, the LA Guns, the Quiet Riots, that sort of thing. So no shame here. What are your thoughts, Jason? You were actually in a band, Dangerous Toys, that often gets lumped into that category. So first, some thoughts on the genre in general, and your feelings on, your experience with Dangerous Toys during that time.
Well, personally, I hate the term,
Yeah,
but it is a quick start to, a grouping, if you will, that, people don't know what else to call it because they are media babies, right? And so
yeah,
they immediately, are comfortable calling it hair metal because if you try to change the way that they think about what it is that they like, um about hair metal, then the name doesn't work for them because it's ingrained. Like Twisted Sister to me is not a hair metal band. They are a rock and roll band.
yeah,
They're a lot of people would argue with this, but Twisted Sister is actually a little bit closer to what I uh, would put what I would say about Motorhead than not. That they
yeah,
are a rock and roll band.
yeah,
They
yeah,
are louder than your average rock and roll band. They are meaner and scruffier than your average rock and roll band. You know, when you said something earlier that, hair metal might lean more towards style, I wanted to be clear. Do you mean clothing? Do you mean a look
yeah. I kind of,
other than
yeah,
substance? Right. Well,
yeah,
substance to me will always win. And I'm sure and I would like to think that you feel the same,
sure, yeah,
because even hair metal bands put out bad music.
yeah,
Um, whether you can be the biggest fan of a band and then hear the new record and go, "Man, what happened?" So, everyone knows that feeling. Um, back to what I was saying, I feel like there's bands that get lumped in. Luckily, Dangerous Toys, there is a demographic. I don't know if it's in the hundreds or even the tens, and much less the thousands of people who are Dangerous Toys fans who they don't like it when someone lumps Dangerous Toys into the genre of hair metal.
yeah,
That would be to this I just call it a small demographic, the small army.
yeah,
They lump Dangerous Toys in with whatever Junkyard and Circus of Power and Rhino Bucket and things
yeah,
like that would be, because the people still lump the bands I just mentioned into hair metal,
yeah.
I I don't know how we can't be friends anymore. I'm kidding, but, that's you know what I mean? So,
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I'm sorry that's like calling AC/DC hair metal because
Yeah,
I mean, let's if you just called it and this kinda goes to what I was saying a second ago, if you called it '80s metal, Metallica is '80s metal.
yeah,
So what see what I'm saying? So, I don't care what you call it, you can call it glam if you want, but see, to me, even, like, there's some Rat songs and some Cinderella songs that are not really glam songs to me.
yeah,
They could have been written by, I don't know, AC/DC and the Rolling Stones.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
more of a timeless classic rock thing. I've
Sound.
always thought, not to just to pick a band. Let's go ahead and pick a band. Let's pick Cinderella since
Yeah,
I'm on Cinderella. Are they a hair metal band? It's to me, it's arguable. I always thought that the name was terrible because of when you listen to the record, it's not,
there's nothing wussy about it.
right.
Yeah,
There's nothing that bothers me more about someone saying, "Oh, I love hair metal, I love Cinderella," and then I'm listening to the song, it's like, are they hearing the same song that I'm hearing?
yeah,
Because like I said, it sounds like this. If Aerosmith, I mean, is Aerosmith a hair metal band? Do you see where I'm going with this?
right, right,
I don't think Aerosmith is a hair metal band.
right. I
So,
don't either. Yeah.
it's very strange to me, you know
Well, the genre gets associated with bands like Motley Crue and Poison and Bon Jovi and that sort of thing. But within that same time frame, as you mentioned, and I'm glad you did because I was going to make that point as well. There's almost this subcategory of bands that were signed and released albums during that same time, and they were on the radio and they had videos on MTV. But they were grittier, the Junkyards, the Rhino Buckets, the Dangerous Toys, Circus of Power, uh, uh, Sea Hags, bands like that that had a more of a streetwise kind of gritty sound and image too. A lot of the hair metal bands had the big hair and the colors were very vibrant. They kind of moved away from the standard issue denim and leather, and they were wearing neon greens, and one guy in the band had to have a headband, and the jackets had all these fringy spangles on them and stuff. And bands that were already established that were still active during that era, they weren't immune to it either. Because I can remember seeing pictures of Saxon and Crocus and Judas Priest, and they all traded in their denim and leather at some point during the '80s and had the white leather jacket and the big hair and the long overcoats with all the glitter and glam on it.
Yeah,
Um,
while we're talking about it, I also remember Dave Mustaine wearing this quite I'll just be frank, sorry, Dave, fringe, like, he was wearing these fringed, like, long fringe, like
yeah,
Bon Jovi fringe,
yeah, I
leather
remember.
jackets on stage and in videos and stuff, and I'm like, "Man, that's crazy." It's so not thrash metal at all,
Yeah,
but I feel like there was something about it that, I don't wanna say he was being pressured into it, but it just could have been like, in the water, you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like, somewhere in somebody in his head, one of the voices in his head said, "Yeah, you need this jacket. This will be good in the video," kinda thing, but now when I saw it, even when I saw it, I was just like, that's weird. It's kinda like, and I'm guilty of this too. I've actually got a photo where me and Mike Watson from Dangerous Toys were up at MTV Studios, and we did a promo thing for the Shocker movie soundtrack and Megadeth and Alice Cooper, and we did a Halloween special, da 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 da. Anyway, in the photo, me and Dave Mustaine are both wearing like a half shirt. Our our midriff is showing,
My
you know,
God.
and it's just I'm going, me
My eyes are burning just
yeah,
thinking about that.
me and Dave Mustaine were not really we were cool because we were thinking the same thing, that we thought that was cool, but it's not cool. I
Yeah.
feel like Chachi, wore that. I
Yeah.
don't even know
Welcome
if
back,
Ke
Hotter or
I don't even
something.
know if Ke exactly. Juan Epstein wore that,
Yeah.
We're dating ourselves here, but that's okay.
True.
Uh, but I think that just bad clothes are bad clothes, and you just don't know until you just know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, there were great bands that didn't necessarily fit the mold. But then let's talk about the bands that actually not only fit the mold, but pretty much defined it. And those would be your Motley Crues and your Poisons and your Bon Jovi and Warrant and things like that. Do you find any redeeming musical value in any of those bands? I know it's not your typical style, but surely you've got to like the occasional Motley Crue song or maybe a Warrant tune or a Dawkins song or anything. Is any of that in your guilty pleasure
I I
collection?
thanks for calling me out, Dave. The,
What are
I
friends
would
for,
I wouldn't
right?
even call it a guilty pleasure. I would say, um, I like metal. I like rock and roll. So what's in between, whatever genres, the writers at Rolling Stone have come up with this week, they're
Yeah,
we can thank them for the term grunge, just like we can thank them for the term hair metal. And
yeah,
I pretty much worship at the coattails of D. Snyder. And I think that he will call Motorhead a metal band only because of the attitude of Motorhead.
yeah,
But he
yeah,
knows that, much like Twisted Sister, Motorhead is a rock and roll band.
yeah.
It's blues played faster and louder than any other blues you've heard before. That's just rock and roll. That's what rock and roll is.
Right,
So
right.
yes, I mean, there would be a lot of people that wouldn't give a band like Warrant the time of day, but I've done shows with Warrant, with the Toys, throughout the years multiple times, and they're so talented and such a great rock and roll band. Uh,
Yeah,
you you can you can make fun of their clothes all you want,
yeah,
but when you just meet the people and hear them and see them play their songs, they're great. So
yeah,
that means more to me than just having to hear Cherry Pie and kind of having a laugh at Cherry Pie, you know,
yeah, yeah,
which is, even the guys in Warren are like, "Oh, geez, Cherry Pies are gonna be our biggest song," and then, "Oh, shit, here it is. That's our biggest song," you know?
right,
Uh, and
right.
that's and it happens,
Yeah,
I don't have to I guess I have to quote Lemmy again, "Be careful what great mistakes you make along the way, because that might be your claim to fame. That might be
yeah,
the biggest
yeah.
shining moment is that great mistake that you made." So,
Uh,
uh, I think I've already said I love Cinderella, I just hate the band name, and I don't know
yeah,
why they were wearing all that stuff on the Night Songs cover, because the record just didn't sound to me like it. I mean, I get it, they were wearing boas, but that's because they were trying to be Aerosmith.
yeah,
Um, Once you get past that, it's not relative to hair metal to me. I just think that lack for better terminology is
yeah,
what we're kind of arguing here. Uh,
yeah,
but the bands I mentioned before, that sort of like stable of dirty rock and roll bands like Raging Slab and Circus of Power over on the East Coast, and even Bang Tango and can roll in there a little bit with Bang Tango might fall a little bit more into where LA Guns and maybe Pussycat were, but not by
yeah,
much. Um, and even Faster Pussycat sounds a little more just like closer to what Hanoi Rocks was. I mean, do they call Hanoi Rocks a hair metal band? Because they're it's different to me.
yeah.
I don't know if I'm confusing you or anybody else listening, but
Uh,
there's
I,
I
I,
have
I,
I have qualms with the term more than I do with the music, that would be under the genre name.
Yeah, yeah, and I think maybe the deciding factor. I'm glad you brought up Cinderella. I think maybe the deciding factor is, can you go back and listen to one of those albums today and find that it doesn't sound dated? And if you listen to Night Songs, or you listen to the first Faster Pussycat album, or you listen to any of the Junkyard records, I'm not hearing, it doesn't scream 80s to me when I listen to it in the year 2021. But if I listen to like a Bon Jovi or a Poison or maybe a Warrant, I hear a certain polish or a certain cleanliness to the music or something that kind of transports me back to the 80s. It's kind of got this slick 80s sound, and that becomes sort of the identifying factor. And I think some of these other bands that we've mentioned, like the Rhino Buckets and the Junkyard Circus of Power, that sort of thing, you listen to their albums that came out in 89, 88, 87, or whatever. I feel like there's definitely a sound that's associated with 80s hair metal. And I think that has to do with the production in the studio and that sort of thing. So, you put a Junkyard album up against a Poison album in the year 2021, even though both of those albums were released in 1980. And the Poison album, if it's not the first one, if it's, Open Up and Say Ah, for example, is going to sound much slicker than the Junkyard album. And I think that's sort of a distinction that needs to be made too.
I might have an argument for you there
Go for it.
because of tone, technology. I disagree
Okay.
because the tone of a Junkyard song is not what you're talking about. You're talking about production. Am I clear?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
talking about
okay, yeah.
production. Yeah.
Yeah, so technology is gonna give a little bit more of a shine to something that's recorded in more recent times than the old Poison record.
Right.
So, and it all depends on budget too, and fans don't think about this. If you can hear all the instruments and the tones are pleasant, yet it's still knocking your ass in the dirt,
Yeah.
I think that your Junkyard record is the medicine that you need, and whatever anyone's getting out of a Poison record, I'm a little bit uncertain of still after all these years, but whatever they're getting out of it, if it still does the trick for you, doesn't matter when it was recorded. So,
Yeah.
I think that the thing that you're mentioning about it being polished does have to do with the band's preference on top of the producer they've hired, if they did hire a producer that's within budget.
Yeah.
And, because they're going for a certain tone, a certain way it's mixed. Interesting side note, I was listening to an interview with, Tony Platt, who mixed Highway to Hell and Back in Black,
Yeah.
and, he didn't record or engineer, but he just mixed, and the way those records sound, I don't care who you are, hair metal or heavy metal or whatever, those records are polished, but I
Yeah.
feel like they're polished by f to an extent. Like, you still want that kinda "nar thing going on when you hear Brian Johnson or even Bon Scott's voice. When you think about "Beating Around the Bush" and you think about "Hell's Bells" and what's going on there, I think that, there has to be some grit, and
Yeah.
even it doesn't matter, how many lollipops and flowers you lay on top of it. I think that, what you're looking anyway, that sort of set a standard for what it is the hard rock, 80s metal and hard rock genres actually sought or were sought after when you're just a person in a rock band and you of course you have Back in Black and Highway to Hell in your hip pocket as a
Sure.
deserted island choices.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
want your rock and roll to kind of have some of that going on in it. So
Yeah.
whether you think that, Highway to Hell and and Back in Black are polished or not, I do, but I also think they kick you in the butt too, so
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up budget because two of the bands that are considered the leaders or the forerunners of the whole hair metal genre, those being Poison and Motley Crue. If you listen to their first album, each of their first albums, they were on such a shoestring budget. Those albums don't sound hair metal at all. They sound like garage punk slop, in a good way. And it's just interesting that they kind of became the poster boys for what was became known as hair metal. But if you listen to those first two records, there ain't nothing sugar coated about them. They're pretty raw out of necessity, and I love them for that. But
That's back when they were just called rock and roll bands too.
exactly, yeah,
Just,
exactly.
just
I
to say the point. Poison's been around long enough now to where you could just look at the timeline of their releases and hear how the production changed and
Yeah,
hear how well, the same with Motley Crue, just like you could do any band before, um, what genre, what box they were shoved into without their a band doesn't have a choice as to where they're gonna be, you know, categorized. So
yeah,
you just
yeah,
write the songs. Hey, it's like, "Hey, I don't know, man. I just work here." It's
yeah.
that whole so
Yeah, I think, I don't want to I I don't want to lay the blame, and it's not blame, but I'm wondering if hair metal would even be a term if it wasn't for the massive success of Bon Jovi. Because I feel like once Bon Jovi blew up, then every band, every record producer, they all wanted to look the part, sound the part. Their videos all looked the same, and it kind of became the recipe that everybody else followed if they wanted to go down that path. And a lot of them did, and a lot of them maybe were coerced into that path by labels or management or whatever. But I feel like Bon Jovi, the explosion of Bon Jovi, was sort of what started what became, the hair metal genre in both look and sound and style and that sort of thing.
well, I
But
also feel like, this is not I'm not really changing the subject here. When I talk about Headbangers Ball on MTV, well, they were playing Poison and they were playing Bon Jovi on Headbangers Ball.
yeah, yeah. Well, because there was a time when that stuff was considered metal. It was called heavy metal maybe before the term hair metal came along. There was a time when anything with an electric guitar and long hair was considered heavy metal. And I think that was, you might be able to that might stem from the success of Quiet Riot. They had that blockbuster record. The word metal was in the title, and
And
uh,
everybody has hair, so
yeah, everybody
let's
has long hair.
let's mess it up for everybody,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
say, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of long-haired people playing, so Willie Nelson is hair metal. Plays guitar, has long hair. This is the problem I have. So MTV calling it Headbangers Ball, I understand why they would call it Headbangers Ball. But
yeah,
me personally, just personally, people can, if they're gonna get mad at me because, obviously I'm outnumbered.
yeah,
The term headbanger,
yep,
that is a generic term. I realize that. Supposed to be sort of a stereotype, if you will.
yeah,
It's like hair metal is a stereotype. I come from a land of dinosaurs that if you were called a headbanger, it was a compliment.
yeah,
If you were called a headbanger and that person in the photograph was wearing just using terminology, they're just words, I didn't make them up, a hair metal band T-shirt, and someone called them a headbanger, I don't like it
yeah,
because whoever was calling that person a headbanger, I would call them wrong. I would say, "Wrong, wrong," but they're not wrong. They're not wrong
yeah,
because of
yeah,
the narrow how dumbed down it's all become, and so when there's a show, Headbangers Ball, and SOD is the intro music, and then a Bon Jovi song comes on, This is where I'm walking out of the room.
Somebody missed the boat there. Yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
see why no, they didn't. They're spot on because of how generic and how it's like you don't call an energy drink Rockstar because that killed the Rockstar. There's no
Yeah.
more rock stars anymore
Yeah.
because of the dumb and the numb down of everything. Can you tell I'm bitter? So anyway, it's just the way that I learned and perceived it and took it all in is the issues that I have, but they're my issues, everyone, they're not they may not be your issues.
Right. I think anybody that's a fan, me, you, and a bunch of our friends, anyone listening to this podcast, you're going to realize that tags and categories are just that. They're cut to the chase
Yeah,
descriptors
yeah,
that I've mentioned before are not always entirely accurate,
yeah,
but they're a way to cut to the chase. They're the way to put something in a box,
yeah.
and there you go.
So you
It's
think
funny.
go
It's
ahead, I'm
funny.
sorry.
It's funny that you bring up Headbangers Ball because something that's burned in my brain, and I bet you could look this up on YouTube. Back when Headbangers Ball was hosted by Adam Curry instead of Ricky Rackman, you remember this?
Of course.
And uh, Adam Curry was more of a pretty boy. He had the blow dried hair and the wardrobe and everything.
Well, he's from New Jersey, so
He didn't look authentic as not as authentic as
he
Ricky
he
Rackman, but
he looked like he was friends with Bon Jovi because he was.
yeah.
His wardrobe looked like he borrowed it from John, so
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
speaking of his wardrobe, so here's my point. He was hosting Headbangers Ball one time, and I want to say it was Scott Ian was in the studio as a guest, and Adam Curry is wearing a leather jacket with all these pins on it and stuff, and trying to look the part of the metalhead or whatever. And Scott Ian points out one of the pins on his jacket, and it was the band Helloween. And Scott says, "Oh, that's a really cool Helloween pin." And Adam said something to the effect of, "I don't know anything about it. You'd have to ask Wardrobe."
oh, that I love it. See,
I mean, he just laid it
no,
bare, man. He just
he calls
confessed
it
right
out. Yeah,
there.
he's being real, and that's what I appreciate about, DJs and VJs is when they don't know and they can just not try to play it off. That's respectful. That's
Yeah.
respectful.
So
Um,
what do you make of the band? Some of the bands I mentioned earlier that were already established and then sort of changed their image to sort of fit in with the times. I mentioned Saxon and Crocus and Judas Priest, and I'm sure there's many others, but these were acts that already had albums out uh, in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. They had already established an identity, they already established a look. And then hair metal becomes the fashion of the day. And suddenly these guys are all literally changing their colors. What do you make of that?
they're following trends,
Yeah.
it's as simple as that, and I don't think that they even realized that, their new jacket had been modernized or something. They just saw it and they were or someone gave it to them or they whatever it was. I don't really like it that we're talking about the clothing because
Yeah.
the music changed too.
Yeah.
It did,
Yeah.
and, it wasn't I love anything and everything Judas Priest, and I could talk about Judas Priest for, 24/7, but there were times where there was some sort of, I feel like, identity crisis. Um, I feel like, a band that may or may not have had some sort of identity crisis that just kinda it worked the entire time, and that was a band, the Scorpions, that fit the, where you're coming from, had an entire catalog that was released prior to 1980
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
had an entire catalog that kept going through the decades,
Right.
and one of the greatest rock and roll bands, notice I did not say hair metal,
Yeah.
ever,
Yeah.
and, I feel like them sort of following the trends or since they're a German metal band, uh, kind of fall into you know, we're following the trends, but it's not really changing the way that we are. I think that as early as even, Love Drive and, Animal Magnetism, and then Love at First Sting, uh, those records were forming the new Scorpions
Yeah.
before fans' very eyes, and yet they were still playing their old stuff mixed in live,
Yeah.
and it really just like Judas Priest.
Yeah.
But I feel like the Leather and Studs Judas Priest is just a preference that I have as opposed to Leather and Studs with, multicolored fringe and mixed in sort of a, "Hey, let's put some splashes of color in what it is you guys are doing,"
Yeah.
and it was just a little too bright. I thought it was pretty wild that Halford grew his hair back out.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Slicked
it
it
was
back.
yeah, it was very interesting, and I guess that would have been Ram It Down '88.
Turbo.
Yeah,
Turbo.
Turbo and
Yeah.
Ram It Down, and those are not my favorite Judas Priest moments, and just
Yeah.
like at this you could call it the same with the Scorpions. I just feel like the Scorpions fared a lot better with the
Yeah.
trend following and the changes because it didn't really affect where the Scorpions kind of were already going.
Yeah. Good
Um,
call.
yeah,
That's a great point.
I
Yeah.
think so too, but, Judas Priest, is lumped in with hair metal too, by the way.
Yeah,
They
because
are.
well, they were an active band in the '80s, and I think anybody in the '80s, and they didn't do themselves any favor by, the wardrobe around the Turbo era. And, let's not forget, they also introduced the synthesizers became a big part of their music at that point. So again, maybe catering a little bit to the expected sound of that time period. I
It's
don't
very
know.
very possible, personally, when I think of, these bands, I don't think about those records or those times, I think about the classic hits, and
Yeah.
as well as all the deep cuts that I'm in love with, but those usually don't get a lot of play unless you're, belong to a group of dinosaurs, which I do, where we
Yeah.
talk about what's your favorite song that's not Living After Midnight, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or
Right.
whatever, and then and then I think about, like, Queensryche, same at the same time, there were keyboards,
Yeah.
Queensryche, as far as I recall, had a lot of keyboards and synthesizers on their later records or their late '80s, records, Mind
Yeah.
Crime and things like that, I feel like were probably their peak moments. So,
Yeah.
with the trends that were being followed, it really worked out for a lot of them.
Yeah.
And, I think that made a lot of the early '80s metal that I was into sorta translate to the trends that were being followed, which is kind of I'm surprised this realization as I talk about it, I'm like, my eyes are popping open. It's like, wow, it kinda really worked out for some.
Yeah.
Um,
You nailed it with the Scorpions. I mean, that's a band that has weathered all kinds of trends and fashion and musical taste and whatever, and they've done it all very, very well. I mean, you can look into the '70s catalog, you can look into the '80s catalog, and you can look into the current catalog, and they really have very few things to be embarrassed about. I mean, they managed to kind of make a little tweak here or a little tweak there to sort of fit in with what was expected of the day, but they never really threw in the towel all the way. They never really quite caved in and gave up who they were or what they had already established.
I wanna put the scoop of ice cream on top and say Whitesnake, same. Same exact thing. Had an entire catalog in the '70s, Coverdale's involvement with, Deep Purple, and then just becoming pretty much an MTV god with
Yeah,
the new and improved Whitesnake where everyone had they went and got their hair did, and
Right. Right.
they put on a bunch of colors, and he had he had basically, he being Coverdale, had fired the original Whitesnake and got all these pretty guys to play in Whitesnake.
Yep.
I mean, Tommy Aldridge is not that pretty, but he's one of the most badass drummers in the world,
Yeah,
and
sure.
he was in the back, you know,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
I love Tommy Aldridge, and he's been around
Ever.
forever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there's some pretty dinosaurs out there, and, he's one of them. And then Rudy Sarzo was also involved in that, but dude, he had like talk. It was Whitesnake became a super group when he did that.
Yeah.
It wasn't the original Whitesnake where it's closer to Deep Purple.
Right.
It was closer to blues, heavy blue British blues rock.
Yeah.
And it had more of a polished, there's that word again, thing, and it had a bunch of bright clothing and hairspray.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up Whitesnake, another classic example of a band that already had an established identity, and you could kind of see that they were kind of heading in that direction anyway. Sure, they catered to the cameras and to MTV and sprayed up the hair and put on the clothes, but the sound was kind of already moving in that direction. I don't think they overhauled their sound necessarily in order to fit in with the times. It was kind of gently moving in that direction anyway.
Are you still talking Whitesnake? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Whitesnake, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And funny that you bring up Whitesnake because I interviewed Vivian Campbell one time, and I was asking him about joining the band, and he told me that the band that became the face of Whitesnake during the '80s with Rudy Sarzo and Vivian Campbell and Tommy Aldridge, Coverdale, um, and Adrian Vandenberg. Um, he said Vivian told me that those guys had never even stood in the same room until they showed up to shoot the video for Still of the Night. That was the first time
Wow.
all those guys gathered in one place, Usually it's you gather in the rehearsal hall or the recording studio or whatever. It was like, nope, we all met on the video shoot. That's how prepackaged that was.
Yeah, so they that must have well, that makes it an obvious that, well, I've got Vivian coming in to cut his parts at 5 o'clock, and I've got Adrian Vandenberg coming in 3 days later to cut his part, and then we're gonna do some vocals later on, yeah, so everyone's coming in different, so, who knows? It could have been, scratch tracks played by one of them, and, then, drums, with the drummer, and then, who knows, man? That would be a cool article to read is how that Whitesnake record from '88?
Yeah, it's pretty well documented. It is a lot of behind the scenes session work and guys that weren't listed on the album cover and certainly weren't in
Ah,
the MTV video.
right.
They weren't pretty enough, and that was Coverdale and everybody involved in that band will admit, just tell you straight up, that's we repackaged the band to look good for MTV because MTV was where you needed to be in those in during the
What
'80s to
about
help sell
what
records.
about what about John Sykes? I mean, he would have fit in that. I wonder what the falling out was with him and Coverdale because he would have worked. He could have just
Yeah,
stayed, and then he wouldn't have had to go get Vivian or Adrian. He could have just gotten one of those guys instead of both, and
yeah,
maybe who knows the backstory behind Sykes, but he was on that Slide It In record, and I saw them on that tour, and it was
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. I saw it too,
Yeah.
and that was a great album. And
I
Sykes is a great player.
and I wouldn't call it hair metal.
No, I wouldn't either. It's
No.
funny, you started this whole conversation by bringing up Twisted Sister, and they get plastered all over the place whenever the topic is hair metal, and Dee Snider is sort of the face of the genre in some ways, but I don't consider them hair metal at all. They they brightened up their wardrobe. They weren't wearing the denim, cut off denim jackets anymore. But I've always thought they were a much tougher, grittier, hard rock band. And when you got a singer like Dee, who's got that very muscular vocal tone, they just sound tougher than the average hair metal band. But
Man,
they,
if you talk to someone from New York, or from the island, from Long Island, from the early club days in, like, the mid-70s, and you talk to someone who was at all of those early Twisted Sister shows when they were doing matinees and stuff, doing 2 and 3 shows,
yeah,
like, every Friday night, um, you could almost hear this person say, "Yeah, they might as well been an AC/DC tribute band,"
yeah,
which was
or
unheard of back then to use the word tribute band, but because they worshiped AC/DC, and when they heard Motorhead, they were all into Motorhead, and
yeah,
they every time the first time Motorhead played in New York, those guys were all there worshiping and befriending Motorhead, the original the Ace of Spades lineup,
yeah,
and, uh, and that was a long friendship.
yeah, yeah, it
That
sure
was a
was.
long that came into like, Eddie was involved in production, played song recorded with them, produced their first EP, I believe, need a fact checker for that, but there's a long Motorhead Twisted Sister relationship going on there.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I remember reading a story where Twisted Sister went to England and the crowd to open for Motorhead, and the crowd was being very impatient with Twisted Sister and didn't like their look and just was, practically throwing stuff at them. Uh, and Lemmy came out and got on the mic and said, "These are our friends. This is I'm proud to have these guys all the way from New York. Please welcome my friends, Twisted Sister." And then all of a sudden, that was like the stamp of approval. And so Lemmy, embraced Twisted Sister, and it was a mutual friendship, like you said, and it lasted until Lemmy passed away. But yeah, uh, definitely Twisted Sister, they were all over MTV and Dee Snider's face was all over the media and everything, but they definitely had more in common with Motorhead and AC/DC than they did with, what is commonly referred to as hair metal. So let me ask you, what if I had to put you on the spot, which band that falls into the hair metal genre would you say is your favorite?
I like the question. There are a lot of bands that, a lot of those bands I've shared stages with, and I've got to see them like the Warrant story I told earlier. They were a great, well-oiled machine, and they can play their instruments and just super talented. And I only know from the original Warrant, with Janie Lane.
Yeah,
And they were so nice to us. You know, I wasn't that excited to do shows with them because I didn't really it wasn't really my thing. I was listening to Merciful Fate and Motorhead
yeah,
and Exciter or something,
yeah,
um, but at the same time, it's like, these guys are super nice and damn, they could play. And
yeah,
there were a couple of good songs, but, there were I like, if I'm gonna pick a song, um it's more like it's almost like a version it's almost like a power ballad, but, House of Pain by, Faster Pussycat.
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
we were on the road with them, in Europe when they were, uh, Wake Me When It's Over tour, and, that song still is I think it's a great song. It could kinda be a country song,
Sure.
where
Yeah.
where it's sort of a timeless, very well written, not hard to play, sort of almost a Bob Dylan type of a folky type of a song.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's important. There's a bunch of them. I mean, is if Wasp is hair metal, they're more of a heavy metal band, but,
Yeah. I'm
you know,
glad you brought them up.
a lot of people are gonna call Wasp a hair metal band.
Yeah. I'm
And,
glad you
uh,
brought them up
I don't really like, Blind in Texas. That sounds like a sin because here we are
in
born
Texas.
born and bred in Texas, but that's not their best moment.
Yeah,
Absolutely love their first record. I love Sleeping in the Fire. Once again,
awesome song.
oh my god, it's so evil, and
Yeah,
it's a power ballad. How can a power
yeah,
ballad be evil?
yeah,
All Blackie's fault. He's just so good at that, sounding just gnarly like that.
yeah,
But I love, the old, like, Fuck Like a Beast and, just, Tormentor and Love Machine and stuff like that. And, Wasp toured with Slayer, and
yeah,
here we are talking about hair metal, and we can talk about Slayer. Meanwhile, like Slayer and Metallica are from Los Angeles, and they were really trying to, you know, shun any like it was just everything was a poser. You're a poser if you have to
yeah,
spray your hair up and put on bright colored clothing to feel like you can go do a gig.
yeah,
And
yeah,
they were really anti that, but they were also 17 and 18 years old and they just angry young teenagers, and I we all can relate and fit into what it is they're saying. In the meantime, are we a poser because we like Wasp, you know?
yeah,
So there were probably people going to see Slayer and Wasp, but I would imagine there'd be a Slayer demographic that was like, "Poser, you're posers, you got too much
yeah,
makeup on. Hey, what are you doing after the show?" Kind
yeah, yeah.
of a thing when Wasp was playing, but
I'm
Wasp
glad. Yeah,
Wasp is a heavy band, so
yeah. I'm glad
they're
you bring them up because they do get lumped into the hair metal genre, and that brings me to two other bands off the top of my head that often get lumped in with the hair metal category, but they were very much metal bands, and that would be Armored Saint and Lizzie Borden. They also kind of got thrown in there,
that is not that's not heavy metal. If anything, it's power metal or even rock and roll. Like, Armored Saint has metal riffs, but, the way that people would call Ozzy, Blizzard of Oz and Ozzy Osbourne, his
Yeah,
solo band, that's not power metal, and that's not heavy metal, and it's not hair metal. It's
yeah,
closer to a heavy metal than anything. Well, I put Armored Saint right next to what some people would struggle to call Ozzy Osbourne's music.
yeah. Well, they were one of those bands that I remember that had a tough time trying to distance themselves from, they're trying to do gigs around LA and they're getting paired up with Poison and Warrant and stuff like that. I don't know if that's an actual fact, but I remember reading interviews with the Armored Saint guys going where because it was the 80s and they were in LA and every band in LA was a hair metal band, they were having a hard time, you know, finding bills that made sense and trying to distance themselves from the flavor of the week because they weren't all of that. They
Right.
look like Mad Max, and they
Well,
were
I can relate, and, the fact that they were accepted into the, "Oh, you guys have hair and you play metal, but you're not a hair metal band, so you can play with Metallica club." They were
yeah,
in that club.
yeah, yeah,
They could escape, but, Armored Saint toured with all those hair metal bands, just like Slayer did. Metallica toured with Wasp, so maybe Wasp was sort of the breaking point, sort of a
yeah,
gateway band to someone liking, it to be a little bit more, costumey and
yeah,
Alice and theatrical, and kissy and Alice Coopery.
yeah,
Not words, I sound like I'm talking baby talk, but just to prove the point.
yeah,
But I think that Wasp was kind of a gateway band from, I'm gonna throw up and say hair metal into what would just be heavy metal
yeah,
or even early thrash metal, which is
yeah.
kinda where we
They
are.
kind of bridged the gap. In some ways, they had a foot in both,
Yeah,
in both. But
yeah,
yeah, and you mentioned Ozzy just a minute ago. There's another classic example of a guy who was clearly established as one thing, and then here comes the '80s, and he's on MTV with his hair sprayed up, and he's wearing a yellow glittery jacket and has a little sash hanging off of his microphone and everything. So he's another guy that kind of felt obligated maybe to sort of cater to the times to some degree. But
It was a confusing time. I don't I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but it was I wanna just underline what I feel like you think where I think you're going. It's confusing, like bridging the gap, I think is what we're talking about here,
yeah,
where Ozzy is all glammed up and everything, and he's the Prince of Darkness, but he's wearing a glittered trench coat.
yeah,
What the fuck is that? What right?
exactly.
So that was confusing, and then, but I wanna sort of, like, mirror that sort of, like, weird time, using Ozzy, I guess, as the example, and Metallica is on the rise and Slayer is on the rise. And it was a confusing time for hard rock and heavy metal fans because, well, do I like sequins, trench coats, or do I like holes in jeans played, with metal played at the speed of light that
Yeah,
are about darker, there was a middle ground that people were having to, oh, I like it all. I'm omnivorous, and that's great. Well, think about when, dare I say, hair metal again, and then it switching over into grunge. It's
yeah,
almost a mirrored time where the trend is the wind is blowing the dollar bill somewhere else. Who's gonna follow it? So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, we could talk at length about hair metal and all the subgenres that it spawned and all the, the pros and cons of the wardrobe and the hairspray and all that stuff. But I think some great music came out of that time period. We got some great guitarists out of that era, Vito Bratta, George Lynch, Warren DeMartini, Zach Wilde came along. There were some great players. Another band that gets lumped into hair metal, and maybe more rightfully so than some of the other bands, but was just a bang up bunch of musicians, was Winger. I mean, they got beat up
Yeah,
big time for
yeah.
being, especially Kip. He's a good looking guy, so they got beat up by the metal crowd for being too. I don't know, not hard enough, I guess. But man, everybody in that band is just a wicked musician, and
Yeah,
you
they
know,
were
it's,
I always thought that they were better than Dokken,
yeah. I
but
mean,
Dokken was at the party first,
yeah,
and that's
so
kinda they were better than Dokken on a lot of levels. They had a real singer,
yeah,
they had real musicians. I'll just stop there.
yeah, the genre is much maligned, and sometimes the bands themselves didn't do themselves any favors by their choice of wardrobe or whatever. But I've always been a fan of a lot of stuff that gets called hair metal. I love
Yeah,
Faster Pussycat. I love
yeah.
L.A. Guns. I love the early Motley Crue stuff. So no shame here. Let's wrap this up and move into our final segment. Shot of rock and roll. So my shot of rock and roll for you today is, most people know your background as a singer, as a performer. They know the bands you've been in, that sort of thing. I wanted to ask you, as a singer, we all know you're a big fan of Bon Scott and Rob Halford and many others, but is there a vocalist that served as an inspiration to you that might surprise us, let's say?
A vocal influence.
Yeah, that's maybe not so obvious.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that I'm wearing a lot of my idols on my sleeve,
Yeah.
especially if you listen to Broken Teeth. There's 2 guys that I'm kinda taking from, but every once in a while, even in Broken Teeth, I guess, my Halford and my, Dan McCafferty and my, you know, Steven Tyler kinda starts to come out.
Yeah,
Um, I really love Dee Snider's voice. Guy is, like, one of the best front men, if not the
totally.
best front man in the world.
Yeah,
And, who the hell did he learn it from is, I'd like to ask him that. Who did you take from? Because he's been doing it, you know, as long as I've been alive.
yeah,
And, I'm trying to not to not date, D, but, um, I love John Bush. A lot of just my vocabulary really had, like I said, I'm wearing it on my sleeve. A lot of my idols are in my vocabulary, and I'll use them as pillars to lean
Yeah.
against all the time. But not an obvious one,
Yeah.
probably Elton John.
Elton John. Wow.
Elton
Okay.
John as an influence. I feel like, when there is, like, a certain tone that's happening in a song that's not, where the vocal is not over the top or above the break as a vocal term, uh, in a higher register that might have a little grit and it's a little more gnarly, but like a Steven Tyler, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
people when they say Steven Tyler, you think about this thing that's happening, and when you say Elton John, you would think about a thing that's happening. It probably doesn't happen as often as people think when they think about my vocals, but it happens more than people think. And that's probably something where it's a little more croony sounding.
Yeah.
Maybe it happens more in maybe the Toys than it does in Broken Teeth, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might even happen in things that, are just not as popular, like an Igniter, where they might write it off as, "Oh, he's kinda channeling Dio right there," when honestly, it's probably a little more Elton.
Wow. Yeah.
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 And
Elton
it's and
John.
it's
Good
it's a
one.
bluesy thing. I'm doing little trills, and maybe I'm holding this grind out for a while, and it's in my middle to low register, so that's something maybe, if interested, you could look for later and go, well, I wonder if that's what he was talking about. And I'm not saying it sounds like Elton John, but it definitely is something that I probably picked up when I was younger, just
Yeah.
listening to Elton every day because there was a lot of Queen and Elton John going on in my brain.
Yeah.
Um,
Good one. Yeah, I
yeah,
don't think a lot of people would immediately associate Elton John with you based on the music that you're known for. Uh, I've always known that you've been an Elton John fan, and a lot of your friends know that as well. But to a lot of people out there listening, that might come as a surprise. That's exactly what I was looking for, something we might not guess about your vocal inspirations.
right, right. My shot of rock and roll for you is in your travels, I should say. Maybe I'm specific to the people that you've interviewed in the past. For those of you who don't know this already, most of you should. David is a journalist, and David Glessner, Metal Dave, is the same guy, and he has been interviewing people pretty much for 15 to 20 years. Maybe not that long. How long?
20, 25,
20,
something like
25.
that.
Holy crap.
Yeah, yeah,
And you're with a nickname like Metal Dave, everybody just is going to assume that everybody you've interviewed is a hard rock or a heavy metal person. What
yeah.
what musicians that are non-metal, have you interviewed?
Oh man. Good one. There's been a few. You mentioned Willie Nelson earlier in this episode. I've interviewed him.
Holy crap.
Yeah,
That's huge to me.
yeah, he was actually on the golf course when I called him. So
Wow.
he did the interview from a golf course somewhere on tour, and we were talking. The reason for our discussion was, I believe, his Farm Aid was about to happen, and
Mm. What
you know,
year?
it's since I lived in Austin, so I'm gonna say it was around 97, 98, somewhere in
Okay.
there. And I remember doing that interview because, of course, who doesn't want to interview Willie Nelson? But I remember, much like you said, most of my interviews have been metal dudes and rocker chicks and stuff like that. And I remember interviewing Willie Nelson thinking, now here's one my parents will actually be proud of.
Yeah.
So Willie Nelson comes to mind. I've also interviewed Kenny Rogers.
Okay.
Um, I interviewed
Were there
Larry.
any gambler jokes in your interview?
No, but
Oh,
it's
dang
funny
it.
that the reason I interviewed him, and this was actually an in-person interview. I was living in Galveston at the time, and he had that show. His song "The Gambler" turned into like a TV show that lasted for a couple seasons or something like that. And he was filming an episode in Galveston on the island when I lived there. So the newspaper I was working for at the time sent me down there to track him down and try and get an interview with, this legendary country western superstar. And so I went down there, and if you're familiar with Galveston, there's a theater called the Grand, and it's a historical old theater, and they were shooting some scenes in there. And when he was done shooting scenes, I got to stand on the stage there with him in the Grand and ask him a few questions, mostly about the show, because that was the purpose for me being there. And his co-star, oddly enough, was oh God, what's her name? Uh, Dixie Carter. Is that right? Dixie Carter. She was a TV star. I want to say her name was Dixie Carter, but I interviewed her as well. And in her dressing room as she was having her makeup put on and everything. But yeah, so as far as musician interviews that aren't metal, Willie Nelson, Kenny Rogers, Larry Gatlin is another one that I interviewed.
Wow, man, these are not this is not just some up and comer. You're talking to living legends.
Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so yeah, those were fun because I knew that my parents would get a kick out of that. My parents aren't necessarily thrilled when I'm interviewing Blackie Lawless or whatever, but they can get behind a Willie Nelson interview.
Right. Right. Well, we could do a talk louder country music episode now.
We should.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be a lot of fun, actually.
I grew up with that stuff around my house. My dad was a country western fan, so I grew
Right.
up on the greats,
Yeah, I think
and
that I think that we need to talk offline about the ideas and how we could pertain that and how it even reflects to rock music.
yeah, yeah. Well, we will. Let's do that offline. For now, let's wrap this one up. I wanted to tell everyone out there listening to please do us a huge favor, hit that like button on our YouTube episodes. It really helps boost our ratings and grow the show, which is the whole purpose here. We love hearing from you. Leave your comments on our message boards. And Jason is again teasing to some upcoming Talk Louder merch. We will be letting you know about that soon, very soon, actually. We've got some surprises for you, some merchandise, that sort of thing, and we'll let you know how to acquire that. But anyway, thank you for listening. Hit that like button, subscribe, share, leave your comments on our various platforms. We love hearing from you, and we will answer you back. So, with that, Metal Dave Glessner here, signing off, along with my co-host Jason McMaster. Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Talk Louder podcast.